Welcome to today's reading from Ramayana, the story of Lord Ram, compiled by His Holiness Bhaktivikas Swami. We are on Ayodhya Kanda at the moment. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, Mukam Karoti Vachalam Pangam Langate Kim Yat Kripatam Amate, Shri Gurum Dina Tarinam Paramananta Bhatavam, Shri Chaitanya Ishwaram. So yesterday we finished when Lakshman and Sita Devi, they all insisted to accompany Lord Ram to the forest, and Prabhupada comments, it's been given the footnote here, that a chaste wife follows the husband in every stage of life. Whether the husband is king, she's sitting by him as a queen then, and if he goes to the forest, she also follows there, despite having to tolerate all kinds of difficulties in living in the forest. At last Ram agreed. He then instructed Lakshman, "You may certainly come, but first take leave of your mother. Afterward bring the two mighty bows given by Varun to Maharaj Janak, the impenetrable armor, two inexhaustible quivers, and a pair of swords. After paying your respects to Vashisht, return here with the weapons and we shall depart." Having fulfilled Ram's orders, Lakshman returned. Ram then asked him to summon the foremost of Brahmins so he could distribute all his possessions in the charity. Soon after, Suyajna, the son of Vashisht, and the sons of Agastya and Vishwamitra arrived at the royal palace. After duly welcoming them, Ram instructed his dependents to look after their palaces in their absence. Ram then ordered his treasurer to bring forth all his wealth. Thereafter a huge hill of gold and jewels was stacked high, along with other valuables, such as clothing, chariots, and animals. In this way Ram began to distribute his possessions. It happened that a Brahman named Trijata resided in the forest near Ayodhya. Because of his extreme poverty, the Brahman was very weak and frail. His wife pleaded with him to go to Ayodhya to ask some charity from Ram. Thereafter, Brahman set out and happened to arrive just when Ram was distributing his wealth. When the Brahman approached him and described his impoverished condition, Ram jokingly replied, "Take your staff and throw it as far as you can. As many cows as that stick passes over, I shall give you." Trijat, it's not Trijata, is it? I think it's Trijat. Trijat tightened his belt and then excitedly threw his staff into the air. To everyone's surprise, his staff soared all the way across the Sarayu and landed amongst a herd of thousands of cows that were grazing from the river's edge up to the point where the stick had landed. Ram then embraced the Brahman, saying, "Please do not be offended by my jest. I merely wish to see your exhibition of Brahminical prowess." After that, Ram gave away everything in his possession. He made sure that no Brahman, relative, dependent, or beggar failed to receive charity on that day. Ram, Sita, and Lakshman then proceeded on foot through the streets of Ayodhya towards the palace of Maharaj Dashrath. The citizens, observing Ram travelling about in this fashion, some from their 7-story mansions and others in crowds on the street, all became greatly pained. They cried, "Oh, how unfortunate that even common people are now able to see Sita, who formerly never appeared in public. We shall take our families to accompany Ram so that Ayodhya will become like an uninhabited forest and the forest will become like a populous city." As Ram entered Kekai's quarters, he saw Sumantra and asked the charioteer to announce his presence to the king. Upon hearing the Ram's arrival, Maharaj Dashrath ordered Sumantra to assemble his consorts so he could meet with his son in their presence. Shortly thereafter, 350 young maidservants came and surrounded Kaushalya. Then, when Ram, accompanied by Sita and Lakshman, entered his father's room, King Dashrath ran to embrace him. Overwhelmed by grief, the king fell unconscious before reaching his beloved son. At that rush, Ram rushed forward, picking up his father in his arms, while all other people cried in anguish. After being brought to his couch, Dashrath regained consciousness. Ram then said, "My dear father, I have come to bid you farewell. Please give me your permission to depart for the forest with Sita and Lakshman." Maharaj Dashrath urged, "Ram, please accept my advice. Take me captive at once and then occupy the royal throne by force. No one can stop you." Ram replied, "Dear father, I have no desire to achieve sovereignty over the earth or royal opulence." Maharaj Dashrath then said, "You may leave with my blessings, but please stay here for just one day so I may have opportunity to see you." However, Ram replied, "I must leave immediately. It is my duty to fulfill your promise and do as Kekai has ordered me. I must leave for the forest at once." Maharaj Dashrath then embraced Ram, and afterward he again fell unconscious. Sumantra, who was weeping profusely, also fell to the floor. Everyone except Kekai cried aloud with grief. Sumantra had been the most intimate associate of royal family, thus he, more than all others, suffered because of the calamity before him. Suddenly Sumantra approached Kekai and began chastising her harshly, saying, "O wicked woman, by sending away Ram, you will become the murderer of your own husband. Your selfish demands violate the religious principle that a kingdom be handed over to the eldest son. Indeed, you shall reap the bitter fruits of your evil deeds, for when Ram goes away, all the Brahmanas will follow him. Thus your kingdom will become devoid of all auspiciousness. I will tell you something for your benefit. Once upon a time, your father Kekai received a benediction from a rishi that enabled him to understand all languages, even those of animals. However, in giving the boon, the rishi made one condition. If Kekai ever disclosed the meaning of any speech that he heard from an animal, he would die. Later, the king once happened to hear the shrill cry of a bird. Because he understood its meaning, he began to laugh heartily. However, the queen, your mother, imagined that the king was laughing at her. Therefore, she demanded to know what he found to be so amusing. The king then informed the queen of the rishi's benediction, warning her that he would die if he disclosed what the bird had said. The foolish queen was so stubborn and jealous, however, that she replied, "You can live or die. I do not care. I only insist that you tell me why you are laughing." The mortified king then went to the rishi who had given him the benediction, explaining his predicament. The rishi advised that he not disclose the bird's speech and that he should rebuke the queen for her impudence. Taking the rishi's words seriously, Maharaj Kekai gathered his courage and chastised his wife severely. After that, he lived happily ever after. In the same way, Kekai, you are acting impudently towards your husband. Admit your fault and give up all your wicked plan. Kekai, however, remained unmoved. Thus, considering Ram's exile to be inevitable, Maharaj Dashrath ordered Sumantra, "Make ready one Akshauhini Sena or soldiers and organize many merchants, hunters, and the royal treasurer so that they may accompany Ram into exile. Though he may reside in the forest, my beloved son does not have to go without the objects of comfort and enjoyment." Hearing this, Kekai was seized with fear. "Bharat will not accept the kingdom if you strip it of all its resources before his installation." Growing progressively weaker, Dashrath said, "If you will not let Ram go to the forest in comfort, then I shall take all the citizens with myself and accompany him." Kekai snapped, "In our dynasty, there is the example of how King Sagar exiled his eldest son, Asamanjas. Therefore, you should cast off Ram in the same way." Hearing this, the elder minister Siddharth retorted, "Asamanjas used to take delight in drowning other children in the river Saryu. When the citizens complained of this to King Sagar, he rejected his cruel son. How is your comparison valid? Where is the fault of Ram?" Ram interjected, "My dear father, please do not upset. I have no use for the royal comforts you desire for me. Let Kekai's maidservants bring me back at once so that I can wear suitable clothing for my forest life." Hearing his request, the shameless Kekai personally went and brought clothes made from tree bark and asked Ram to put it on. Without hesitation, Ram and Lakshman obediently took off their royal garments and put on the clothes presented by Kekai. Sita, however, felt very unhappy when she accepted her dress made from kusha grass and tree bark, and her eyes filled with tears. When she tried to put the dress on, it kept slipping, for she was not at all accustomed to such clothing. Ram then took the dress of tree bark and draped it over Sita's silk sari. This was unbearable to Vashisht. With tears in his eyes, he restrained Ram and chastised Kekai with strong words. "You wretched woman! Don't you see that everyone is prepared to follow Ram? Indeed, you will follow. Find that even Bharat and Shatrughan will follow him, leaving you alone to rule an empty kingdom. At least allow Sita to go into forest with comfortable red dress and be carried on some conveyance." Sita, however, was determined to follow her husband's example and kept the forest clothes on. Seeing Sita dressed in this way, the palace residents began to condemn Dashrath with strong words. Hearing their talk, the king lost all interest in continuing his life. Nearly 1 hour passed as Maharaj Dashrath remained delirious, incoherently mumbling words of reproach to himself. Later, the king became a little more composed. He ordered Sumantra to bring a chariot to carry Ram to the forest. At this time, Kaushalya embraced Sita and gave her the following womanly advice. It is known that during times of misfortune, women will desert even righteous and loving husbands. Such wicked women forget all past favors and nothing can bind them. Because of ingratitude, such selfish women cannot be controlled by wisdom, gifts, or even marriage. However, there are also women who are gentle, truthful, and obedient by nature. Thus they honor their husbands above all. O Sita, please do not despise my son on account of this exile. Let him always remain your worshipable Lord in all circumstances. Sita accepted her words with folded hands and replied, "I know well my duty toward my husband. Please do not speak to me about faithless women. My attachment to Ram is like that of the moonlight to the moon. There is no veena without strings or chariot without wheels. Similarly, there is no future for a wife who's without a husband, even though she may possess 1,000 sons." Thinking of the impending separation from her son, trying to comfort her, Ram assured her that the time would pass quickly. Then he took leave of his stepmothers as they wept loudly. Ram then went and clasped the feet of his father. Circumambulating the king with Sita and Lakshman, Ram bowed low before his mother and father. Then, without further delay, Ram, Sita and Lakshman mounted the chariot and departed for the forest. Thus Lord Ramchandra left behind his kingdom, opulence, friends, well-wishers, residents, and everything else, just as liberated soul gives up his life and went to the forest with Sita and Lakshman. Maharaj Dashrath kept his gaze fixed upon the dust raised by the chariot as it gradually disappeared over the horizon. Finally, after losing the sight of Ram's departing chariot, the king fainted and fell to the ground. When Kaushalya and Kekai ran to lift him up, Dashrath forbade the younger queen, saying, "Do not touch me. I have disowned you. I no longer want to see you." Kaushalya lifted her husband, and while bringing him back, saw that all the stores and shops were closed and a gloom pervaded the citizens. After entering his palace, the king asked to be taken to Kaushalya's apartments. From now on, the king declared in a faltering voice, "I will only stay here." Maharaj Dashrath passed the night with great difficulty. He felt that losing Ram was like the dissolution of the universe. Seeing the king and Kaushalya in such a miserable state, Sumitra tried to pacify them. "Please do not lament for your son, for Sita and Lakshman are with him. Ram will not experience the least difficulty." Indeed, Ram is not an ordinary human being, but the God of gods himself, the illuminator of the sun and the controller of eternal time. While Ram resides in the forest, the earth herself and all natural phenomena will engage in his devotional service. Have faith that you will one day see the return of your beloved son. Your lamenting serves no purpose. Already the citizens of Ayodhya have practically stopped all activity out of grief. You must pacify the subjects and not let them fall prey to anguish. Meanwhile, some of the citizens had followed Ram's chariot to the forest, begging him to return back. Ram told them, I cannot break my vow. I desire that you repose in Bharat and same love you have for me. As they travelled, Ram saw how some of the elderly Brahmins were having difficulty keeping up with his chariot. Hearing their anxious pleas, Ram felt great compassion and descended from the chariot. Then, along with Sita and Lakshman, he proceeded on the foot, allowing the Brahmanas to catch up with him. Still, Ram would not turn his face backward, for he was determined to keep his vow perfectly. Thus, as the Brahmanas constantly beseeched Ram to turn back, they reached the bank of the river Tamasa. As the sun slipped over the horizon, Sumantra and Lakshman selected a site to rest for the evening. Then, after smoothing the ground, they made a bed of leaves for Ram. When he lay down with Sita, Ram quickly fell asleep. Nearby, Lakshman stayed awake all night, discussing the glories of his elder brother with Sumantra. Early next morning, when Ram awoke, he saw that some citizens of Ayodhya were sleeping nearby. Just how much the citizens love us, Lakshman, Ram said. They will not give up their determination to follow me, trying to bring me back to Ayodhya. They have completely forgotten their homes and families. They should not be burdened by Kaikeyi's curse as we are. Let us go before they awake. Devising a plan, he told Lakshman, let Sumantra drive the chariot in such a way that the citizens will become confused and unable to follow us any further. After crossing the river Tamas, Ram instructed Sumantra to drive the chariot over the clearly visible path while taking evasive measures that would mislead the citizens and then return. Sumantra then drove off, and then he returned some time after. Ram, Lakshman and Sita mounted the chariot and proceeded quickly down another path into the forest. When the citizens awoke, they looked in all directions for their beloved Lord. Searching desperately here and there, they found the tracks of the chariot wheels, but after some distance the tracks suddenly stopped. Unable to determine which way to go, the people gazed into the distance and wept. With Ram gone, the people reproached themselves, saying, how can we return to Ayodhya without Ram? What will the women and children say when we fail to bring him back? What is the use of living here without the beautiful moon-like face of Ram? What is the use of a husband or children or even life itself? What good are household pleasures without the daughter of King Janak and the lotus-eye Ram? With no alternative, the citizens returned to Ayodhya, feeling extremely depressed. When the household women saw that the men had returned without Ram, they reproached them with cruel, harsh words. Many simply sat down and wept. Due to shock, some of them were incapable of speaking or hearing. Everyone in Ayodhya began condemning Kaikeyi, swearing that would never live under her rule. Thus, life in Ayodhya came almost to a standstill. Appearing like a great ocean whose water had dried up, the Brahmanas neglected their duties and mercantile people gave up conducting business. Householders no longer took the time to prepare meals, and the domestic animals let the grass drop out of their mouths so that, as though stunned. The cows would not give milk to their calves, and mothers no longer felt happiness in greeting their sons and daughters. Even the stars in the sky assumed a stern aspect. Feeling tormented with grief, no one in Ayodhya could eat or engage themselves in entertainment. Indeed, everyone appeared to be almost lifeless, being absorbed in feelings of separation from Ram. As Ram proceeded through the various territories, villages and forests, he heard the people condemning Dashrath and Kaikeyi for exiling him. Finally, after crossing the Veda, Shruti and Gomati rivers, Ram arrived at the river Syandika, which marked the southern boundary of the Kaushal province. Ram stepped down from the chariot and with folded hands faced Ayodhya to take leave of his birthplace. Many local inhabitants had followed Ram, and when he asked them to return home, they cried loudly, unable to depart. Thus Ram drove swiftly away, hoping to minimize their anguish. When they reached the Ganga, Ram asked Sumantra to stop the chariot under the tree on the bank. The king of this territory was named Guha, a Nishad by birth and a close friend of Ram's. When Guha heard of Ram's arrival, he jubilantly came to meet him along with his ministers and relatives. Although born in a Nishad family and belonging to a lower caste, King Guha had all the qualities of a great devotee. He was peaceful, self-controlled, humble, tolerant, and charitable. In truth, he was superior to a Brahman because he was fully surrendered devotee of the Lord. It is a great mistake to think that a man's caste is determined by his birth. That is not the Vedic conclusion. Rather, a caste is determined by quality. Seeing Guha's approach, Ram and Lakshman came forward to greet him, and the Nishad king embraced Ram with great affection. Feeling distressed at seeing the two brothers dressed in forest clothing, Guha said, "My dear Ram, my kingdom is as much yours as mine, therefore please make use of everything as if you were in Ayodhya. I am honored to have you as my guest." Guha brought sumptuous food, comfortable beds, and articles of worship to treat Ram to a royal reception. Ram was pleased to see this and embraced Guha and said, "At heart, I accept all that you have offered me. However, since I have taken a vow to wear only kusha grass, tree bark, and deer skin, and eat only fruits and roots, I cannot utilize these gifts. Therefore, please take away what you have brought, except for the food which I can use to feed my horses, for they are the favorite steeds of Maharaj Dashrath." At that, Guha gave the sumptuous feast to the horses. Ram only took a little water, for he was fasting that day in honor of the Ganga. That night, Sita and Ram slept beneath a tree while Lakshman and Guha guarded them. Although Guha requested Lakshman to take rest, he refused to do so while Sita and Ram were sleeping. The next morning, Ram decided to cross the Ganga. Hearing his decision, Guha ordered his men to bring forth a beautiful boat to carry them across. When the boat arrived, Ram told Sumantra, "Please return now to Ayodhya and serve Maharaj Dashrath. Try to remain composed so that you will be in a position to pacify the others. You have been of great help to us, but from now on we shall proceed by walking." Sumantra pleaded with Ram for permission to accompany him to the forest. Ram, however, insisted, "Please go and attend to my poor father. Do not be aggrieved, for we shall certainly return in 14 years' time. Assure my parents of my well-being and urge the king to install Bharat without delay. Please also request Bharat on my behalf to treat all his mothers equally." Unable to bear the thought of leaving Ram, Sumantra argued, "When I return to Ayodhya alone on this chariot, the people will become hundreds of times more unhappy. O Ram, please allow me to accompany you. If you leave me aside, my life will become unbearable. I will surely enter fire or drown myself." Ram then replied, "I am sending you back to Ayodhya so that Kaikeyi will be convinced that I have entered the forest. If you do not return with this chariot, then some fear will always remain in her mind that I might come back at any moment." Turning to Guha, Ram said, "I do not want to live in a forest surrounded by friends and servants. I shall go to an uninhabited place and live like a rishi. Therefore, please bring me the milk-like extract of a banyan tree so that I can mat the hair." When Guha brought the substance, Ram and Lakshman used it to make their hair matted, and they looked like forest-dwelling ascetics. Then, while bidding farewell to Guha, Ram, Sita and Lakshman boarded the boat and departed. So we will carry on from here onwards tomorrow. It has been a very sad reading today, to see the love of the people and to see the Lord taking upon himself all the miseries so that his father's words don't go unhonored, and how he has taken his stepmother's instructions to his heart, and he has left the palace, the Kaushal Desh, with his wife Sita Devi and Lakshman, his younger brother. And we will continue from here onwards tomorrow. Thank you for joining. Hari Om Tat Sat. Hare Krishna.